Hello friends, this video on life processes part 1 is brought to you by examfear.com. No more fear from exam. Topics to be covered in this lesson are introduction, what are life processes, nutrition, wherein we'll talk about modes of nutrition, autotrophic and heterotrophic, nutrition in plants, nutrition in amoeba, nutrition in human beings, respiration, wherein again we'll talk about respiration in plants and in human beings, transportation in plants and in human beings, excretion in plants and in human beings. So let us first try to understand that what is our agenda in this lesson. What are we actually going to study here? The name says life processes. So what does it mean? The processes which lead our life, or what are these processes? So let us have a look. Before that, let me ask you one thing. So in biology, we are going to study all about life, right? So how do we distinguish between a living organism and a non-living organism? For example, on this screen, you see that I have divided the screen into two halves. So the one half is dedicated to the non-living things and the other half to the living things. So if you see here, on the left hand side, you can see the fan, the bell, chairs, tables, umbrella, guitar. All of these are categorized as non-living. Whereas on the right hand side, we have a man, elephant, rat, birds, trees. So they are all classified as living organisms, right? Now the question is, how do we actually distinguish between which organism is living and which organism is non-living? Now if you take the example of one of these things, for example, if we compare a man with a guitar, so what are the symptoms or what are the signs which tell us that man is a living being whereas a guitar is a non-living thing? Some of the things are, a man can move from one place to another, he can move his hands, he can read, he can write, he can run, he can do so many things. So the movement involved with the bodies tell us that man is a living being and the guitar is not, because it is always stationary at a place. Now let us suppose if the man sleeps, then how do you distinguish whether the man is a living being or not? So even when a person sleeps, there are certain activities which is going on within his body. For example, a person breathes when even though he is sleeping. So even if he is sleeping, he is not moving his hands, he is not moving his legs, he is not doing anything, but still he is breathing. Not only breathing, but there are many other processes which take place inside our body, and because of those processes taking place, we are actually living. So the living organisms actually exist because there are so many processes happening inside them. So do you think that a man or any living organism can live without any food? No, right? If we stop eating, so what will happen? We will start becoming weaker and weaker, and gradually a day will come when we will not be in a position to be alive, right? So why do we need that food? Because there are so many things happening inside our body. So for that we need energy, and from where do we get that energy? We get that energy from food, right? So these processes which are taking place inside the body of any living organism are known as life processes. So in this lesson, we are going to talk about the different life processes which keep happening inside the body of a living organism, right? Okay, so now let us see what are life processes. So let us look at the life processes. So as I just mentioned, that there are several processes which happen inside the body of every living organism, and each organism needs energy for various activities. For example, to move, to reproduce, to breathe. So for doing any kind of activity, each and every organism needs energy, right? So if not only the examples of animals, even if you take the example of plants, do you think that plants don't need energy? It is not like that. Even plants need energy. Have you ever seen that if you stop putting water to your plants, the plants tend to die? They dry up and they eventually die. Similarly, if you keep the plants in a very dark place where they do not get sunlight, the plants will eventually die. So each living organism have their different energy needs depending upon the structure of their body. Because what is body? Body, the fundamental unit of body is cells, right? Now each cell needs energy. So every organism will need energy. So how do we define life processes? These are the processes which together perform the maintenance functions which are essential for sustaining life. So as long as these processes are happening, we say that the living organism is actually living. So that's why you would have seen that when a person dies, what happens? When a person is dead, he is no more breathing. There is no more digestion taking place inside his body, right? So all the basic activities which used to take place inside his body is not taking place anymore. So as long as these life processes are continuing, the organism is living. So these are the processes which are essential for sustaining life. Now life processes exist in both unicellular and multicellular forms. That is very obvious. For example, whether we consider a very simple organism like an amoeba, which is made up of one cell. So that one cell has to perform all the functions of the body. So in that case, we do not have any specialized organs, correct? But in case of multicellular animals, we have cells which are combined into tissues, and the tissues are again combined to form different organs, and each of these different organs perform different functions. For example, there are some organs which are used for respiration, that is for breathing. There are some organisms which are used for digestion. There are some other organs which are together forming the nervous system. So we have specialized organs to perform specific functions, right? So basically, these basic processes or these life processes are the signs of life. So if any one of them fails, so it can cause a problem to the body. So what kind of processes? Now, when I talk about the life processes, in fact, when we talk about the processes which take place inside our body, what all processes keep happening inside our body? For example, movement. We are able to move our hands, feet, everything. That's because we have the entire muscular system inside the body. Similarly, processes happening inside body, for example, digestion, for example, food intake. So when we take food, there are some processes which keep happening inside the mouth. For example, we chew the food. So the teeth actually helps in masticating the food. Similarly, the saliva also plays its role. So there are so many things which keep happening inside our mouth. We have something called as excretion. What is excretion? It means the removal of waste materials from the body. We have processes like reproduction which keep happening inside our body. There are processes like growth. You would have seen that a baby growing into an adult. So how does it grow? It is not that masses or bones or something or fats are added on his body externally. It is not like that, right? So the growth also happens internal. Not only that, the absorption of food, that means the food particles which we take in. For example, we consumed rice, right? So what happens to that rice when it goes inside our mouth? So some processes keep happening inside the mouth. Then it reaches our stomach. So there are some processes by which it actually reaches the stomach. So again, something happens with that rice even inside the stomach, and some energy is produced. So that means there is some conversion of energy from food. So food gets converted into energy. So these are some of the examples of processes which keep happening inside our body, right? So now if any one of them fails, for example, if I say that the process of digestion fails, then what will happen? Now if the process of digestion fails, whatever food particles we take in, it will not get digested. So the person will suffer from indigestion, he will fall ill. So for the healthy functioning of a living organism, all processes has to go on in synchronization with each other. Right? So here whatever examples I have given, they are just examples. They are not the actual life processes. Now since there are so many different processes taking place inside the body of a living organism, so they have categorized life processes into certain types. So that classification we will discuss in the next slide. Thank you. Please visit www.examfear.com to watch more videos, attempt free online test, get free study material, find tutors and mentors. Thank you once again. Now look at the different life processes. So what are the different life processes? I mean, as I said, there are so many things happening inside our body that instead of learning about so many different things, it is better that we categorize them into groups. So now we will study about each type of life process. So what are the different life processes? Nutrition, respiration, transportation, excretion, control and coordination, reproduction, growth and development, and movement. So these are the 8 life processes which together constitutes a living organism, right? So by looking at the names, I think you can guess what are each of them. So let us have a quick introduction of each of these life processes. What do each of these life processes do? So let us start with nutrition. Are you familiar with the word nutrition? I am sure you are, because we have often heard of the term nutrients. What are nutrients? Something which is good for food materials which are good for our health. You would have seen that there are so many advertisements coming up on your television that this is for some health drinks or some biscuits or some cornflakes, for which they will say that it is extremely nutritious. It has all the essential nutrients which are good for your body. Right? So nutrition, this life process is all about food. How food is obtained by an organism, how the food is taken in, that means intake of food. Now once the food is taken in, after that how is that food absorbed, how is that food utilized for energy. So these are the things which we talk about in nutrition. So that means in nutrition we talk about how food is obtained. We also talk about the intake of food. We also talk about the absorption of food. We also talk about the assimilation of food. What is assimilation? It means how is that food utilized for getting energy out of it. Right? So it is all about that. So that is nutrition. The next is respiration. So what is this respiration? Respiration will talk about 2 things. One is, now in nutrition you have taken in the food and the food is now properly digested and absorbed. Fine, so the food is absorbed. But how do we know that absorbed food is going to give us some energy? So that part is dealt with in respiration. So the respiration has got 2 parts. One part which will deal with the exchange of gases. So we will talk about exchange of gases, wherein we will talk about the process of breathing, and in the other part we will talk about the utilization of food to give energy. Like in respiration we are actually going to talk about how is energy produced from the absorbed food. Now in order to produce that energy we need some gases. So we will talk about that exchange of gases as well. So respiration is actually the process which deals with the production of energy from the absorbed food, because energy is the primary thing. Energy is something which is needed by every living organism for performing all kinds of activities. Now the third one is transportation. So now we have taken in food, we have also produced energy out of that food. So till there it is fine. Now the thing is, the body especially in case of multicellular organisms, the body is quite complex, right? It is not that simple. You have so many cells inside that body, and each and every cell needs energy to perform the activities, right? So, okay, before I go ahead, I would like to mention one thing quickly, that before you go ahead with this lesson, make sure that you have studied all the lessons of biology of class 9th, because these are all in continuation with them, right? So as we will talk about cells, so you should have the idea of the function and the structure of cell in your mind. So if you want, you can refer to the videos of cell of class 9th. Okay, so now in transportation, what do we do? Now, since each and every cell inside the body needs energy, so there has to be some way by which the energy which is getting produced should reach each and every part of the body. So in transportation, we will basically talk about how food or gases are transported to different parts of the body. So we will talk about how food or gases transported to different body parts. The next one is excretion. Excretion means waste removal. So during so many processes taking place inside our body, for example, during digestion or respiration or transpiration, during so many processes happening inside, there are many waste products which are also formed. So even though the processes are actually good for our body, but as a result of those processes, we are getting some certain things which are not useful for the body, rather which are harmful for the body. So we need to get rid of such substances. So removal of wastes is dealt by the process of excretion. So excretion is all about waste removal. Now the next is control and coordination. What is control and coordination? As the name says, control, that means to regulate something. Coordination, that means synchronization between different things. So it is nothing but synchronization between the various organs of the body. For example, when we touch a bottle of hot water with our finger, what happens? We just move our finger back because we feel that it is very hot. So how do we feel? Who decides that it is hot? Our brain, right? So that means there is a synchronization between our finger and our brain. So both of them together performed this reaction, correct? So this control and coordination, that means this sensitivity regulation is performed by this life process called control and coordination. So it is nothing but synchronization between organs. Next is reproduction. Reproduction, what is reproduction? That is giving birth to young ones. So why is reproduction necessary? In order to sustain the species. So if a particular species stop reproducing, what will happen? It will become extinct, right? So if reproduction continues, the same species will also continue. So even for reproduction also, we need energy. Next is growth and development. So when I talk about growth, so how does growth take place? It takes place internally. For example, our height increases or our hair grows. So these kind of growth is something which happens internally. It is not that we add something on our body externally, right? So now the size of the organism actually increases. And how does it increase? There are two different ways. Maybe the number of cells constituting the body is increasing, or the size of the cells are increasing. So in growth and development, we talk about two things. One is number of cells increasing or cells becoming enlarged. And the last one is movement. So movement is, for example, in case of animals as a whole can move from one point to another point, whereas in case of plants, their roots are kind of fixed. So they cannot move from one place to another. However, they can also perform certain movements with their branches or leaves. So when air blows, their branches move, their leaves move. So there are some movements, but they are not completely movable from one place to another because their roots are fixed at one point. right? So these are the different life processes which actually constitute any life form. So if all these processes are happening inside our body, so that shows that the organism is living. Now if any of these life processes fail, the organism will face certain problems. These organisms might fall ill, so it will not lead a healthy life in that case. So now if you want to remember the different life processes so that you do not forget what are the important life processes, so you can just take down the first letter of all of these life processes. So you see, what do you get? NCRT. So NCRT is something which all of you knows, right? NCRT GM. So this is an abbreviation of the first term. So NCERT, N is for nutrition, C is for control and coordination, E for excretion, R for respiration, R for reproduction, T for transportation, G for growth, and M for movement. So you can remember this NCERT GM. So with this you can remember the name of the different life processes. So now our agenda in this lesson is to talk about some of the basic life processes. So in this lesson we will restrict our study to the first 4 life processes, that is nutrition, respiration, transportation, and excretion. So we will talk about these 4 life processes here. However, we will talk about all these life processes in our class 10th syllabus. So in our next lesson we'll talk about control and coordination, then in the further lesson we'll talk about reproduction, and then about growth and development. So you got an idea about the agenda of what are we going to study in biology in class 10th. So I think that this introduction was good enough to give you an idea about life processes. So we'll also see how these life processes which we are going, how are the life processes interlinked to each other. Now as I said, why do the living organisms actually have these life processes? Because the living organisms need some energy, and these life processes will give that energy, because organisms need energy for everything, for walking, running, studying, even for sleeping. They need some energy because we still breathe when we are sleeping, right? Okay, so let us see the relation between the life processes. So the first life processes, what is that? Nutrition. So in nutrition we talk all about food. That means how do an organism obtain food. Now once he obtains food, how does he intake that food? Take the food inside his body. Now then what happens to that food? The food is broken down into simpler molecules, then the food is digested, the food is absorbed by the body. Correct? So now the question is, this food which is taken in during the process of nutrition, how energy, the next question would be, how energy would be obtained from this food which we are talking about in nutrition? So the answer to this question is given by the next life process, that is respiration. So respiration is the process by which energy is obtained from the food which we had taken, and this energy can be utilized for various activities like running, even for chit-chatting with each other. You need some energy, right? If you do not eat something a whole day, if you are on fast for 2-3 days, what happens? You don't feel like doing anything. You don't get that activeness in your body, right? So in respiration, what actually happens is that in presence of oxygen, the food which we had taken is broken. So the food is broken down into simpler substances and a lot of energy is released. So this energy is utilized for various activities. So that's because in most of the complex organisms, when the organisms take food in complex forms, for example fruits, vegetables, bread, rice, all these are complex food, right? So the body cannot utilize the food in its complex form. So what it will do, it will convert the food into a simpler form, and then in presence of oxygen, that simpler food will be further oxidized to give energy which can be utilized for later purposes. So in respiration, we will talk about how we get that oxygen which is needed to produce that energy, and how that energy is produced using the oxygen. Okay, so now the question is, so we got energy from food. From respiration. So now the question is how this energy in the form of food or gas reach the body. So how energy reach each part of body, because each and every cell inside our body needs energy, right? So how do we transport the nutrients or the food or the gases to each and every cell? So that is taken care by transportation. So in transportation, as you can see in this picture, you see that everything is carried to different parts of the body, right? So all nutrients are actually carried in this fashion. So we will talk about transportation in detail in our later slides. So for now you can just understand. So transportation means in respiration energy is produced. Now that it has to reach each and every corner of body. So there we have the transportation. So this transportation system in human beings is known as the circulatory system. And in plants, it is taken care by the vascular bundles. I'm sure you are aware of these names now. We have spoken about the vascular tissues while we were talking about tissues in class 9th. Right? So in human beings, we have the circulatory system for this purpose, and in plants, we have the vascular bundles. Okay, so now the energy and all the nutrients have reached each and every corner of the body. Now, what about the wastes? So now, by the time so many things have taken place, there was a lot of waste production as well, because when the food gets digested, the food is actually getting converted into simpler substances. So during those chemical reactions, a lot of waste materials or harmful substances are also produced. So what happens to those substances? We just cannot keep accumulating wastes inside our body. So those waste products or those useless byproducts which are formed during the process of energy generation needs to be got rid from the body. So the process of removal of such waste products is known as excretion. Right? So now you understood how nutrition, respiration, transportation and excretion are related to each other. So in this lesson we will talk about these 4 life processes in detail one by one. So we will